After a generation of irritation, it feels like the Toyota Tundra is back to being the type of truck it was always meant to be. Ugh. Anyway, instead of taking on Ram, Ford, and GM on their terms, this third-gen version is the right kind of different, but it's still a Toyota, which means a whole whack of user-friendliness was added for good measure. This thing might not appeal to the typical truck buyer, but its execution is unquestionably among the best in the segment right now. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Look, I don't know if I necessarily need to say this, but I'm going to anyways because I don't want to trigger the die-hard truck fans out there. Just because I call this new Tundra good doesn't mean the others in the segment are bad. It just means this new one is good. There's no other way to put it. It's a nice truck. It's nice to drive. It's got some cool features and some cool tech, but it's also not perfect. And we do need to talk about some of the problems, starting with maybe a weird one for some of you, but a big one for me. There's no automatic setting for the four-wheel drive. That is just so disappointing because every other half-ton in Canada has an automatic setting for the four-wheel drive. Because don't forget, we no longer have the Nissan Titan. So the Ram 1500, Ford F-150, Chevy Silverado, and GMC Sierra all have automatic settings, and this one doesn't. That is a big bummer, especially this time of year with all this snow and slippery roads. And look, I get the fact that that's kind of the way that trucks have always been, but it's just a disappointment because modern trucks call for modern features, and this one is very modern. Basically, everything about it is new. There's nothing that carries over from the last Tundra. So the fact that Toyota didn't modernize the four-wheel drive system really does bug me, and I feel like it might be a deal breaker for me. I don't know, let me know what you guys think. Is that enough for you to shop elsewhere, or would you be able to live with something that isn't quite up to the standards set by some of the leading vehicles in this segment? Let me know what you think. And speaking of old school, this is still built on a ladder frame. It's been heavily modified, but it's basically the same as before, same as any other half-ton truck. But I do have to say I'm disappointed in the ride quality, especially because this 2022 Tundra, well, it has coil springs in the back instead of leaves and a solid axle. Yes, that's the old way. It's got the new coil springs, the way that the Ram 1500 does it. And if you take a look at that Ram 1500, it is very smooth. Myself, a lot of other people praise it for its very SUV-like drivability. This is close, but then as soon as you hit a rough section of road, or especially if you're on a precast concrete stretch of highway, this thing just pitches back and forth like crazy. Bumps really reverberate all the way through the frame. It can really rattle your fillings loose. It's very much a truck. It's a little bit of a shame because of how well this thing comes together elsewhere. Yes, I know some of you are going to tell me it's a truck. What should I expect? But again, stuff that is going to set it apart. That's what I expect from this Tundra. So I'm a bit bummed out there, but otherwise, it's very nice to drive. The steering, no, it's not hydraulic anymore, but it's got enough resistance. Not much feel, but it does take some effort to change directions, which is very important, especially in a vehicle this big. And I gotta say, the brakes, usually not something I would compliment in a truck, but they are very nice. The perfect amount of pressure. It just kind of reacts how it should. The brake pedal, as soon as you get your foot into it, it immediately starts to slow it down. It's not too touchy. It's not too spongy. It's just really well put together. I do like that a lot. And then the other thing I like is what's under the hood. There is no more V8 offered in the 2022 Tundra. There's only a V6. It's a 3.5 liter, according to Toyota anyways. I call it a 3.4 because it's something like 3.4223, some weird number. So Toyota rounds up. To me, The right way to call it would be a 3.4. But anyways, that's not the point. The point is this thing makes 389 horsepower and 479 pound-feet of torque. In this limited I'm driving, as well as the Premier, the SR and SR5 trims do make a little bit less output. And then again, this one, peak torque kicks in at just 2,400 RPM. And I gotta tell you, it feels just as forceful as any other half-ton on the market. Yeah, okay, if you take a look at GM's 6.2 liter, that has that distinct, big, naturally aspirated V8 grunt, but this thing's pretty close. It's only audibly that you're gonna notice any issues, but it pulls really hard all the way throughout the rev range. There's also a new 10-speed automatic transmission, and it is very smooth. It's also very smart. It just knows as soon as you get your foot into it, it's gonna downshift, drop a gear so that it's gonna spike the revs, which means you get all that torque as soon as you want it. I do really like that. Just generally, it's very nice. Now, there is also a hybrid on the way that uses this same engine, same transmission. It just wedges a little electric motor between them. It's a lot like the Ford F-150 hybrid that I tested not too long ago. You can go ahead and watch that review once you're done here, because that is a very cool truck. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Toyota does, especially when it comes to fuel consumption, because I gotta say, this thing, not so great. I'm pretty disappointed in how it's performed this week, especially because, like I said, there's no automatic four-wheel drive setting. So I've been cruising around in rear-wheel drive all week, and I'm burning almost 14 liters per 100 kilometers. That is atrocious. Now, technically, it's good for a combined 12.2. That's according to Toyota and Natural Resources Canada. That's even not that good. It's about the same as the Ram 1500 e-Torque. And hey, I just reviewed one of those too, so you can go watch that review as well. If you are a truck person, that's another cool truck. And I do have to say, that one is even worse on gas in reality, especially in wintertime. I tested it in some deeply cold conditions, and I think I finished the week close to 20 liters per 100 kilometers. So, I mean, I guess if you're looking at it in that context, this thing's not that bad, but in the grand scheme of things, downsizing, less cylinders, less displacement, you would think this thing would be better. But then again, it is much better than the outgoing V8 version, which was good for somewhere in the 16s, I think. That was pretty terrible. So I guess Toyota has made some progress when it comes to fuel consumption. I also got to say the Tundra is competitive when it comes to truck stuff. Payload ranges from about 1,500 to 2,000 pounds, and then towing is right around 8,000 to 12,000, depending on trim. But remember, whether you're talking about the Tundra or any other truck, it fluctuates a lot depending on the trim, the equipment that you're picking, cabin size, bed size, four-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive. Keep all of that in mind. Really make sure the one you're shopping for works for what you have in mind before you sign on the dotted line. I have heard horror stories from truck buyers who went to their dealer, were told, yeah, this thing can tow the maximum 12 or 13,000 pounds, and then they find out it's only good for like 9,000 because they got all the amenities. So don't forget to double check that the truck you have in mind works for the type of stuff you're going to be doing with it. And I guess that's as good enough a transition as I can get to talk about this tester specifically. It's a limited, it's got the extended cab and a 6.5-foot bed. I gotta be honest with you, the extended cab, it's never really been my thing. I'd probably spring for a crew cab because it's only a couple grand more, but I do have to say, this isn't totally useless, especially for stuff. If you're mostly cruising around by yourself or maybe with one other person and you want to keep your stuff dry in the back, you can do that. That is really cool. The only thing I miss, reverse hinge doors. I really like those. Now, I guess the downside is that if you need to open the rear doors, it means you have to open the front ones too. But I personally dig that, especially if you're only using it for storage, because if you're getting out, you're gonna get out to grab your lunchbox. You're gonna open both doors anyways. But like I said, it's not terrible. It's not totally useless when it comes to moving people. Sitting in the back right now is Will. He's over there monitoring the audio. He's got tons of room, and there's still room in front of him if we needed another person to sit up front. So I guess it's good in emergency purposes, but again, for the price of a crew cab, that's probably the way I would go. There's no more single cab offered. You can only get the extended cab or the full crew. And then there are like 3 different bed lengths to choose from. You get 5.5 feet, 6.5 feet, and then 8 feet. But again, it depends on the configuration. Certain beds only work with certain cabs only work with four-wheel drive, depending on the trim, TRD package. There's a lot going on here. We're not going to get into all the specifics, but this is still a truck. It can still do all the stuff you want it to, and it can do it in reasonable style. In case it wasn't clear from my intro, I'm not so sure how I feel about this grille. Now, it's unquestionably huge, and for some of you who complain about this stuff, the whole thing is a grille. It's not fake, it's just the bumper down here, but otherwise, it's a little in your face, or in my face. I do have to say though, I think it's cool that it has the contrast color, especially with this navy blue paint. Toyota calls it Blueprint. It's one of my favorite colors on the mainstream market, and it's no charge on this Tundra. The other cool thing is the color of the grille matched with the wheel arch moldings and the wheels on this limited trim. I really do dig it, and I do have to say, when I think of the Tundra, I think of the first gen. It was always a little bit different than the rest of the segment. Remember the old flare side version? Well, you don't get that anymore, but it's still cool. Lots of really cool angles, shapes, crease lines. I do dig that. And just like the Tacoma, it's got a composite bed around back. This one is 6.5 feet. It's got all kinds of cool stuff, tie downs, a power outlet. This is still a truck. And then I gotta say, form really follows function in here. It still looks good. It's got some really cool design cues, including this neat pattern in the seats. You can just see it through the perforation. These little like Tundra logos, very neat. I like that a lot, but practicality really does rule the day here. Everything about it is super practical, and you can tell it's like modern Toyota. Remember the Sienna I reviewed? That thing had all kinds of cool touches that really did make it a very practical vehicle, and there's a lot of that going on here. Even stuff like this. These door sills are so wide that you can actually rest your arm on here without needing the window down. You know, a lot of trucks, your arm kind of falls off unless you have the window down. This is like this super wide platform. It's wrapped in that same kind of faux leather that's on the seats, so it's comfortable, it's nice, but I like that it has that. And then there are more on the center console, and this thing has two ways to open it. You can either slide it open and reach in, or you can still open it like a traditional console bin. That is super cool. Lots of cubbies and shelves. There's this wireless charger up here. Your phone just kind of leans against it. Lots of neat touches. But my favorite part, all the physical controls in here. You've got a whole bank of switchgear for climate control, toggles, buttons. You've got a big volume knob, no tune knob though. That does bug me. And then the other thing that bugs me, all these controls down here by my left knee, I can't see them at all when I'm sitting upright. They're obscured by the wheel. That's really awkward. And here's the thing. I always tell you guys when I talk about stuff like this, I really do minimize what I'm doing behind the wheel aside from focusing on what's going on around me. But it's wintertime. I had the heated steering wheel on when I left this morning, but then my hands got just a little too warm, so I went to turn it off. I can't actually see the button from the driver's seat. And that to me is big trouble, because if you're driving, you need to take your eyes off the road in order to turn that on or off. That's a bit of a disappointment, but again, the rest of the stuff is very good. And then the other cool thing, this 14-inch touchscreen is just amazing. Now, it's not standard. SR and SR5 trims, you get an 8-inch unit, but this 14-inch screen is absolutely amazing. Now, one thing about it is this is kind of ushering in a new era of infotainment for Toyota. Really, you need a companion app with a profile in order to sign in. You also need to subscribe in order to get navigation. So that's a little bit weird, but it's got both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Both of them are wireless now. Both of them are free, and you can use Apple or Google Maps. Apple Maps sucks. I'm a Google Maps guy, but you can use either one in a full screen format, and that is huge. The entire screen is occupied by Google Maps. This has to be the biggest, brightest, and best execution of Google Maps I have encountered yet. I love using this, but the cool thing is, and you guys might not think it by looking at it, it's nowhere near as distracting as you might expect it to be. Yes, it's huge. This is bigger than an iPad, but it's not super in your face. Even just the way that it's set a little bit lower, so it's not really high up on the dash, but it's very well done. The layout, the colors, everything. It doesn't distract you when you're driving, and that is so important. I really do like the way Toyota has executed this, except for the subscriptions and the apps that you need. That part is a little bit of a shame, and not just because I'm changing vehicles every week. I think for a lot of people out there, that transition, especially in a truck, if this is supposed to be a utilitarian vehicle, well, it does feel like a bit of a piece of technology in that regard. So there's going to be a transition there, but trust me, take the time, get used to it, and you will appreciate what this can do. Now, again, I'm not going to go into every trim and package because there's a lot of variation. But if you're talking about this Limited I'm driving, you do get some good stuff. You get this synthetic leather upholstery that I like, heated and ventilated front seats, a heated steering wheel, satellite radio, those wireless phone connections, this big screen, that's a big one. You also get a trailer brake controller built in, which is really cool. And you also get a ton of advanced safety features. And that really does set the Tundra apart from the rest of the segment, because for those, you get some but not all. This thing, you get blind spot monitoring with rear cross traffic alert, and that even works with the trailer hooked up to the back. It'll automatically detect the length of the trailer, or you can program one in. Super cool the way that works. You get lane departure warning, keeping assistance, forward collision warning, reverse pedestrian detection. There's all kinds of really good stuff. Automatic high beams. The only thing that isn't standard is blind spot monitoring. The rest of that stuff, even in the cheapest Tundra, and that is huge. It's well executed too. My only complaint, and this is something I talk about a lot with Toyota, there's no traditional lane keep assist. You have lane keeping, but it's got 2 levels of steering assistance. So it's got lane tracing, which means it'll follow along, and then it's got a more advanced version of that. That's a bit of a shame to me, because sometimes I like to just have that lane keeping on and not have steering assistance as well. I know a lot of people out there that aren't comfortable using steering assistance, so it would be nice to have just your traditional lane keeping, but that is a small nitpick. The other one, it does keep a bit of a wide gap between you and any vehicle ahead of you in traffic with adaptive cruise on. That sucks, but otherwise it's pretty good overall. I also have to say, all that advanced safety gear does help to justify the fact that this thing starts a little bit higher than a competitor like a Ford F-150 in a similar configuration. This one's 47 grand to start, something like that. It's not too bad. The other cool thing is, well, it only maxes out at around $76,500. And with an F-150 or a Ram 1500, you can easily touch 6 figures. Now, those trucks, you can get stuff you can't get here, like massaging front seats or a head-up display. So those are things to keep in mind. But then again, if you're looking at about, I don't know, 25 grand less, that is very appealing. And this one's even more appealing because it's only about 62 grand before tax for this one I'm driving. And then again, a couple grand more for the crew cab. That seems very reasonable as far as the segment goes. I do have to say, I find trucks in general are very expensive. But again, keep in mind, this is a Toyota, so retained value is going to be really high. You might not be able to get the same incentives you can get elsewhere, but this thing is probably going to keep its value longer than a lot of the competition. And that is a big selling point for this truck. To recap, I like how user-friendly the new Tundra is, the full-screen smartphone integration it has, and that it's priced fairly for a truck. I don't like that there's no automatic four-wheel drive setting, that it isn't especially efficient, or the rigid ride quality. What this new Tundra feels like is exactly the right type of half-ton for most shoppers out there, even if unwavering brand loyalty means the vast majority wouldn't even give this truck the time of day. Its priorities are in the right places with an approachable and user-friendly cabin that's perfectly fine for truck stuff, but feels better suited for the rest of the time, which, let's be honest, is most of the time. After a generation spent imitating rivals from Ram, Ford, and GM, this thing is back to being Toyota's version of a half-ton, and that is a good thing.